Hi everybody, welcome again to AP European History. My name is Paul Sargent, and today we're going to be talking about World War I. Now, on the AP exam, you're not going to be required to know a whole lot about the actual war itself. Battles and things like that don't get asked about. It is important, though, for us to understand two main things in today's video. Number one is, how did an assassination start a war? So we're going to sort of go over the process of how the war turned into a war. And then after that, we're going to take a look at how technology changed the war and what the results of it were. And then we'll go ahead and just finish up the war and have some peace and all of that. We're not going to go to the peace treaty just yet, but sort of give you an overview of how the war went. This is going to be a very quick overview. If you want further information, there's lots and lots of videos out there, documentaries. Some of them are very, very long. But for a quick overview of the war, here we go. So our story, as Otto von Bismarck would have told you, starts in the Balkans, okay? And here you see the alliance system that had set up. Now it all comes down in a small area, or a small town called Sarajevo, which you can visit. And this bridge and this river have a whole lot to do with it. Well, at the time, Sarajevo was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So as it goes, the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife visited Sarajevo. And it was going to be a very fateful trip, because on their trip through the city, there was a plot against him. A group known as the Black Hand had decided they would assassinate the Archduke. And so the caravan went down the way, and at this very important corner right here, there was a moment. And the moment centered around this guy, Gavrilo Princip, who goes down in history for one reason. He's the guy who carried out the assassination. Now there's some historical controversy about this, but we can certainly say that Gavrilo Princip started World War I that day. But what he was doing there is something historians still argue about. The old story is that he had kind of chickened out when the first group of assassins made their attack on the Archduke. And so he went in after the caravan had left, that had the Archduke in it, and he'd gone in to get a cheese sandwich. And it was while he was in that shop with the cheese sandwich in his hand that he saw the Archduke's car pull up right outside the sandwich shop. So he dropped the sandwich, went outside, and shot him. Now, some people say that this is true, some people say that this is made up. Regardless, the Archduke and his wife were assassinated that day. And the Austro-Hungarian Empire took this as such an affront that they made them national heroes, and they gave them a state funeral and turned it into something that would become a larger war. Okay, so why did this become big? Well, look, if you're in charge of one of the used to be greatest empires in all of Europe, and you're trying to hold on to power, having some little Serbian nationalist assassinate your heir to the throne is not what you do. And so it kicked into motion a series of events that would lead to this big thing called World War I. Now this is pretty complicated, and maybe you don't need to know every detail about the series of events, but it is important to understand kind of how everyone gets embroiled into this conflict. So let's take a look at some maps and see how this happens. So here's little Serbia, where everything starts. And Serbia is kind of small. So they turn to their allies and other Slavs, Russia, to look for support. And Russia says, yeah, hey, we got your back. Well, that's all fine and good, but Austria-Hungary is a little uncertain now that Russia's involved. So they go and turn and look to Germany. And when Germany says yes to Austria-Hungary, they give them what's known as the blank check. They say, we're going to back you up no matter what. And that allows Austria-Hungary to put down some really strong demands on the Serbians. Now, as Austria-Hungary then puts demands on the Serbians are backed up by the Russians, and the Russians start to mobilize. Now, here's where things get interesting, because according to the Schlieffen Plan, that's Germany's war plan, once Russia mobilizes, the Germans, have to mobilize themselves for an attack on France. So Germany declares war on Russia to get the whole thing started. Russia starts mobilizing their troops, which forces Germany to declare war on France, and starts to invade France. And that's where we have the two alliances which characterize this war. Now there's a whole family component behind this, and I'm sure we could go off for a long time about it. We're not going to here. We're just going to say, remember that on the Western Front, there was this plan called the Schlieffen Plan. Attack France, take them out. It doesn't work. The French get to the front lines, they slow things down, and they start building trenches. So along the Western Front, all the way from the ocean down to the border of Switzerland, we have a long series of trenches that will define this war. All right, so how did the British get into this war? Well, they've promised the Belgians that they'll back up their neutrality. And Germany has to go through Belgium in order to invade France. So once they make that move, the British are in too, and they commit. And most of the big powers of Europe are in. More countries are going to join in. The Ottomans, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, lots of other people. But we've got the main players in now. And this is what happens next. So the war is characterized by the trenches, which is where people spent most of their time, waiting to try and take the other side's trenches. And occasionally, their commanders would send them over the top, usually preceded by bombardments, which are spectacular and absolutely devastated the countryside. Of course, it left a lot of people dead too. But they continued to try to determined to win this war. Now, there was technology that was going to stop this whole thing. That included the machine gun, tanks, the use of poison gas, and even airplanes, which are going to go through and change warfare forever, including the whole idea of bombing. Now, the Germans have one big secret weapon, which is the U-boat or submarine, and they want to use it to attack ships, including those ships which blockaded Germany from the outside world, set up mostly by the British. Now, this was causing great food shortages inside of Germany, especially late in the war. And so Germany announced unrestricted submarine warfare, which brought the United States in. Now, American entry into the war tips the scales in the favor of the Allies. The Kaiser of Germany is forced to give up his throne and abdicate, and eventually an armistice is signed in a very special little train car in eastern France. The armistice goes into effect on what becomes known as Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918. And both sides celebrate the end of the war. People who had previously fought with one another come together as friends, and they all celebrate that, gosh, this whole thing is over. So that's the basic story, especially on the Western Front, but we have to remember there are other places. Wars are fought in the Ottoman Empire, they're fought in Russia, and the war is even fought in the Arabian Peninsula, where a guy named Lawrence of Arabia creates a sort of Arabian nationalism against the Ottoman overlords, bringing a new question of what do we do with all this territory and all these newly freed peoples? But probably the biggest story is the loss of life. A mechanized war creates death. And the loss of life in World War I creates this sense in Europe that this needs to be prevented at all costs. So that's it, the completely oversimplified story of World War I. We covered the spark, the assassination. We covered the series of moves that brought these countries into the war. We covered the different technology which would characterize and change this war, and some of the effects of the war. We'll cover more effects in a later video. But I hope you have a sense of kind of how it went. There's a whole lot more to tell here, guys, and we could probably go on for 2 or 3 hours. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to look at things that the AP exam might really want you to know. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you have, please let me know and click subscribe. That way you can get updated anytime I post new videos. Have a great day. My name's Paul Sargent.